The clinking of ice against glass and the low murmur of conversation filled the dimly lit restaurant. I fidgeted with the hem of my black dress, the nicest one I owned, purchased on clearance last season. The fabric had pilled slightly under the arms, but in this lighting, I hoped no one would notice. The hostess had led me to a secluded corner table with a small candle flickering between two place settings, casting dancing shadows across the crisp white tablecloth. "Your server will be with you shortly," she said with a practiced smile before disappearing into the sea of tables. I checked my watch again, 7:15 p.m. My blind date was 15 minutes late. Anxiety crawled up my spine as I wondered if I'd been stood up. My roommate Jen had insisted this guy, Tyler, her boyfriend's finance buddy, was totally reliable. I should have known better than to trust Jen's judgment. The restaurant, Costello, was far beyond my pay grade. The kind of place where the menu didn't list prices, and the waitstaff moved like silent ghosts between tables. I was a kindergarten teacher with student loans that seemed to multiply like rabbits. One glass of wine here would probably cost what I spent on groceries for a week. I sipped water to calm my nerves, the lemon slice bumping against my lips as I tilted the glass. The hostess led another couple to a nearby table. The woman wore a sleek red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. I sank lower in my seat, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyler. "Running late. Parking nightmare. Be there in 10. Relief washed over me. At least I hadn't been ghosted. I tucked my phone away and reached for my purse, intending to check my lipstick. As I bent down, the purse slipped from my lap, spilling its contents across the polished floor. "Perfect," I muttered, dropping to my knees to gather my scattered belongings. Mascara, wallet, keys, and an embarrassing collection of crumpled receipts spread like confetti beneath neighboring tables. When I finally emerged, red-faced and clutching my reassembled purse, I noticed a man seated at my table. He hadn't been there before. My first impression was of imposing stillness. In a room full of movement and noise, he seemed to exist in his own pocket of silence. His suit was charcoal gray and impeccably tailored, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. His dark hair was cut short at the sides but longer on top, styled back with precision. He wasn't conventionally handsome. His features were too sharp, his jaw too angular. But there was something magnetic about him that made it impossible to look away. Excuse me," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I think you're at my table." His eyes lifted to meet mine. They were a startling shade of blue, not warm like a summer sky, but cold, like the deepest part of the ocean. He didn't smile. "Am I?" His voice was low and accented, each word precisely enunciated. I clutched my purse tighter. "Yes, I've been waiting for someone. My date." His gaze flicked briefly to the empty chair across from him, then back to me. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Something in his tone made my pulse quicken, a primal warning flaring in my brain, but before I could respond, a waiter materialized beside the table. Unlike the other staff, who had politely ignored me during my 15-minute wait, this one practically bowed to the man. "Mr. Russo, your usual Macallan 25, sir," he said, placing a crystal tumbler of amber liquid on the table. The man, Mr. Russo, nodded almost imperceptibly. The waiter turned to me, expectation in his eyes. "I'm actually waiting for—" I began. "She'll have the Barolo," Mr. Russo interrupted, not looking at either of us. The waiter nodded and disappeared. I remained standing, uncertain. This wasn't Tyler. This wasn't my date. I should leave, find the hostess, explain the confusion. Yet something held me rooted to the spot. Curiosity, perhaps, or the commanding presence of the stranger who had claimed my table. "I don't drink Barolo," I said finally, finding a small spark of defiance. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to amusement. "You will tonight." I glanced around, suddenly aware of subtle changes in the restaurant's atmosphere. A broad-shouldered man in a dark suit stood near the entrance, his attention seemingly on his phone, but his posture too alert. Another by the bar, watching the room with practiced casualness. Both wore nearly identical suits. Both had the same vigilant stillness. When I looked back at Mr. Russo, he was studying me with unnerving intensity. "Your name?" he said, again, not a question. Emma, I replied, surprising myself with my honesty. Emma Collins. Sit, Emma Collins. This time I did. The chair scraped softly against the floor as I pulled it out. I sat perched on the edge, ready to flee at any moment. The waiter returned with a glass of deep red wine, placing it carefully before me. I didn't touch it. You're waiting for someone, Mr. Russo observed, taking a sip of his whiskey. A blind date, I admitted, wondering why I was sharing this with him, but I think there's been a mix-up with the tables. He made a sound that might have been a chuckle, though his expression remained impassive. No mix-up. Fate, perhaps. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. I felt a shiver run down my spine despite the warmth of the restaurant. I should go find my actual date, I said, making no move to stand. Tyler Hoffman, he said, and my blood ran cold. 32, works at Goldman, lives in a high-rise on Riverside Drive, currently sitting at a table near the kitchen, looking increasingly agitated. I stared at him, shock rendering me momentarily speechless. How? I make it my business to know who enters my establishment, he said simply. Your establishment? The pieces clicked together slowly. The deferential staff, the men in suits, the usual drink. You own this place? Among others, the wine sat untouched before me, its color deep and rich in the candlelight. Mr. Russo watched me, waiting. The silence stretched between us, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply charged with unspoken possibility. You should try the wine, he said eventually. It's exceptional. Against my better judgment, I lifted the glass to my lips. The wine was unlike anything I'd tasted before. Complex, velvety, with notes of cherry and spice that lingered on my tongue. It's good, I admitted. Something like satisfaction crossed his features. I wouldn't serve anything less. My phone buzzed again. Tyler, undoubtedly wondering where I was. I should check it. I should excuse myself. I should find my actual date, the safe, normal finance guy Jen had set me up with. Instead, I took another sip of wine. What do you do, Emma Collins? Mr. Russo asked, his accent caressing my name in a way that made my skin warm. I teach kindergarten, I said, feeling oddly embarrassed by the mundanity of it. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Children. They're more honest than adults, I replied. More genuine. Honesty is rare, he agreed, and valuable. Our conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front of the restaurant. A man in a rumpled suit was arguing with the hostess, his voice rising above the gentle hum of the restaurant. I'm meeting someone here. She's probably waiting. Emma Collins. Tyler. I shrank in my seat, mortified as heads turned toward the disturbance. Mr. Russo's expression darkened infinitesimally, and he made the slightest gesture with his hand. One of the suited men by the door moved immediately, approaching Tyler with quiet efficiency. Mr. Hoffman, I heard him say. Perhaps we could speak outside. Tyler's protest faded as he was escorted toward the exit. I sat frozen, equal parts horrified and relieved. You didn't want to meet him anyway, Mr. Russo said, as if reading my thoughts. You don't know that, I replied, though without conviction. He trades on insider information and has a gambling problem. He's not worthy of your time. The casual way he dispensed this information, as if Tyler's secrets were common knowledge, sent another chill through me. Who was this man who could dismiss people from his restaurant with a flick of his wrist and knew the darkest corners of strangers' lives? Why am I still sitting here? I asked, more to myself than to him. His eyes held mine. Because you're curious. Because tonight was meant to be memorable. Against all reason, I stayed. The wine disappeared, replaced without my noticing. Food arrived. Dishes I hadn't ordered, but that melted on my tongue in explosions of flavor. Mr. Russo asked questions, and I answered, sharing details about my life I rarely revealed to anyone. My parents' early death, my struggle through college, my tiny apartment with the leaking faucet and temperamental radiator. In return, he offered little about himself. He'd grown up in Sicily. He had business interests across the city. He valued loyalty above all else. Each crumb of information felt significant, as if I were being granted access to something precious and rare. As the night progressed, I became increasingly aware of the way other diners watched us, with deference, curiosity, and sometimes fear. When Mr. Russo stood to use the restroom, a path cleared before him instantaneously. The staff hovered nearby, anticipating needs before they arose. "Who are you, really?" I asked when he returned, emboldened by wine and the strange intimacy of our encounter. "Someone who sees you, Emma Collins," he replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Someone who recognizes value where others are blind to it." The restaurant had emptied around us, though I hadn't noticed the time passing. We were alone in our corner, the candle burned low between us. "It's late," I said, reluctance coloring my tone. "I should go." "My driver will take you home." Again, not a request. I should have refused. I should have called a rideshare. I should have done anything but accept a ride from this mysterious, dangerous man whose name I still didn't fully know. But when he stood and offered his hand, I took it. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. A sleek black car idled at the curb, another suited man holding the door open. Mr. Russo guided me with a light touch at the small of my back. The first time he had touched me all evening, the contact sent sparks racing across my skin. "Tomorrow," he said as I slid into the plush leather back seat. 7 o'clock. I'll send a car." It wasn't a question, but for the first time, I heard the faintest hint of uncertainty in his voice, as if he recognized that this, at least, required my consent. I should have said no. I should have laughed at the presumption. I should have gone home and forgotten this strange, unsettling encounter. Instead, I heard myself say, "Tomorrow." The door closed with a soft thud. Through the tinted window, I saw Mr. Russo watching as the car pulled away from the curb. Only then did I realize I still didn't know his first name, or exactly what kind of man could command such power and fear with mere gestures. As the car glided through the nighttime streets, my phone buzzed with messages from Jen and Tyler, demanding explanations. I turned it off, closing my eyes against the neon lights of the city. Tomorrow. The word echoed in my mind like a promise, or a threat. What I didn't know then was that by sitting at the wrong table, by the simple mistake of meeting Alessio Russo, the most feared man in the city, I had inadvertently changed the course of my life forever, and there would be no going back. I barely slept that night. My apartment, which had always felt like a cozy sanctuary despite its flaws, now seemed claustrophobically small. The dripping faucet I'd grown accustomed to sounded unnaturally loud in the darkness, each drop an accusation. What had I agreed to? What did I know about this man beyond his commanding presence and his apparent ownership of at least one high-end restaurant? Morning brought no clarity. I went through the motions of my daily routine, brushing my teeth while staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Did I look different? Could my kindergartners sense the strange electricity running through my veins? "Miss Collins, your face is all red," observed Lily during circle time, her small finger pointing at my cheeks. "Is it?" I touched my face self-consciously. I must be coming down with something. The lie came easily, but it didn't convince Lily, who continued to study me with the unfiltered curiosity only 5-year-olds possess. "My mommy looks like that when she talks to her boyfriend on the phone." The other children giggled, and I quickly redirected them to the day's alphabet lesson, but Lily's innocent observation lingered. Was I blushing at the mere thought of Mr. Russo? The realization was both mortifying and thrilling. By the time the final bell rang and the last child had been collected, my anxiety had reached a fever pitch. I rushed home, suddenly conscious of the gap between the life I lived and the one I had glimpsed last night. My closet seemed pathetically inadequate, full of sensible, teacher-appropriate clothing and nothing suitable for whatever tonight would bring. I called Jen in desperation. "So, now you want to talk?" Her voice was clipped with annoyance. "After ghosting your date and ignoring my texts all night?" "I'm sorry," I said, genuinely contrite. "It's complicated. I need your help." Tyler is furious, by the way. Says some goon escorted him out of the restaurant. "What the hell happened, Emma?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I met someone else." "You what?" Her anger instantly transformed into excited curiosity. "Spill. Every detail. Now." "I don't have time." I glanced at the clock. 5:30 already. "I need to borrow a dress. Something Nicer than what I have. Oh my God. I could practically hear her mind racing through the phone. You're seeing him again tonight? Maybe. I hedged. Please, Jen. Can I come over? 20 minutes later, I was standing in Jen's bedroom, surrounded by discarded dresses. Her curiosity had morphed into a relentless interrogation. Name? Alessio Russo. The name felt foreign on my tongue. I'd learned it only when the driver had asked where Mr. Alessio wanted me taken. What does he do? He owns restaurants and other businesses. I kept my voice deliberately vague, remembering the fear in the eyes of the restaurant staff. Is he hot? I paused, considering. Not exactly. He's powerful. Jen raised an eyebrow. Powerful how? It's hard to explain. I slipped into a midnight blue dress she'd handed me. He just commands attention. Rich? Definitely. She zipped me up, then spun me to face her full-length mirror. The dress was simple, but elegant, with a neckline that dipped just low enough to be interesting without being inappropriate. The fabric clung to curves I usually kept hidden beneath cardigans and A-line skirts. Perfect, Jen declared. Now shoes. By 6:45, I was transformed, at least on the surface. Jen's dress, her strappy heels, her makeup expertise, and a spritz of her most expensive perfume had created a version of Emma Collins I barely recognized. But beneath the polished exterior, my heart hammered with apprehension. Text me every hour, Jen instructed as I prepared to leave. And if anything feels off, just call. I'll come get you. I nodded, though we both knew the fragile safety net of her promise would be useless against whatever force Alessio Russo represented. At precisely 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Car waiting downstairs. The same sleek black vehicle from the previous night idled by the curb. The driver, a different one today, but with the same watchful stillness, opened the door without a word. I slid into the back seat, the buttery leather cool against my bare legs. Where are we going? I asked as we pulled into traffic. Mr. Russo's residence, miss. My stomach tightened. Not a restaurant or public place, but his home. The car wound through the city, eventually turning onto streets lined with mansions set back from the road. We passed through wrought iron gates that opened silently at our approach, then up a curved driveway to a house that looked more like a small castle than a residence. Stone walls rose 3 stories high, with large windows glowing warmly against the twilight. Perfectly manicured gardens stretched in every direction, and a fountain bubbled softly in the center of the circular drive. We've arrived, miss, the driver said unnecessarily, opening my door. The front entrance stood open, revealing a marble foyer with a sweeping staircase. I stepped into the grandeur hesitantly, feeling like an imposter in my borrowed finery. Emma. Alessio's voice came from my right. He emerged from what appeared to be a study, still in business attire, a navy suit that made his eyes seem even more piercingly blue. You look beautiful. Thank you, I managed, trying to disguise my awe at the surroundings. He approached, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive, but didn't touch me. Come. I thought we'd dine in the garden tonight. I followed him through the house, each room more impressive than the last. Original artwork hung on the walls. Pieces I recognized from art history classes in college, antique furniture that belonged in museums. Crystal chandeliers and marble floors and gilded mirrors that reflected our passing figures like ghosts in a palatial dream. The garden was a revelation, an intimate space enclosed by stone walls draped in climbing roses. A small table had been set for 2, candles already lit, wine already breathing in a crystal decanter. It was painfully romantic. Do you like it? He asked, watching my reaction closely. It's incredible, I admitted, trailing my fingers across a velvet-petaled rose. Do you live here alone? A shadow passed over his features. I have staff, of course, but yes, I live alone. He pulled out my chair and I sat, hyper-aware of his proximity. A silent server appeared with the first course, a delicate soup that tasted of summer vegetables and herbs I couldn't identify. Tell me about your day, Emma, Alessio said, his accent wrapping around my name like silk. I laughed nervously. You want to hear about 5-year-olds learning the alphabet? I want to hear about you. And so I told him, about Lily's observation of my blush. about the finger-painting disaster in the art corner, about the small victories and challenges that made up my teaching day. To my surprise, he listened intently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely engaged. "You love it," he observed after I described a breakthrough with a struggling student. "Teaching. It's not just work for you." "I do," I admitted. "Children see the world with such wonder. Everything is new and possible to them, and for you." His gaze was penetrating. "What seems possible?" I looked around at the garden, the mansion, the man across from me. "Less than yesterday, more than tomorrow." His lips curved in a rare smile. "A philosopher as well as a teacher." Course followed course, each more exquisite than the last. The wine flowed freely, loosening my tongue and my inhibitions. As night fully descended, tiny lights twinkled to life in the trees and along the garden paths, creating a fairy tale ambiance. "How did you know?" I asked eventually, the question that had been burning in me since the previous night, that I wasn't supposed to be at your table? Alessio swirled the wine in his glass, considering. "I have a regular reservation. Every Thursday, same table, no one would be seated there unless there was a mistake. And you let me stay. Why?" His eyes met mine, unreadable in the candlelight. "I saw something in you, something unexpected." "What could possibly be unexpected to a man like you?" The words slipped out before I could censor them. Instead of taking offense, he leaned forward slightly. "Innocence without naivety. Strength without hardness. You wear your goodness openly, Emma. Yet you're not blind to the darkness in the world." The assessment was so intimate, so perceptive, that I felt momentarily breathless. "And you? What darkness do you carry?" The question hung between us, dangerous and electric. For a moment I thought he might answer truthfully, might reveal whatever lay beneath the surface of his carefully controlled exterior. But the moment passed. "Would you like to see the rest of the grounds?" he asked instead. We walked through gardens that seemed to unfold endlessly, each with its own character and theme. A Japanese meditation garden with a stone bridge arcing over a koi pond. A formal rose garden with pathways that formed geometric patterns. A wild, rambling section that mimicked an English cottage garden. "It's like something from a dream," I said, breathing in the night-blooming jasmine that perfumed the air. "Dreams can become reality with sufficient resources," Alessio replied. "And determination. Is that how you built all this? Determination?" His hand found the small of my back as he guided me down a narrow path. The contact, simple as it was, sent electricity up my spine. "I came to this country with nothing," he said quietly. "Everything I have, I've built myself." "And how exactly did you build it?" I pressed, emboldened by wine and the intimacy of the night. "What business are you really in, Alessio?" We had reached a small pavilion overlooking a reflecting pool. The moon's image rippled on the surface of the water, broken and remade with each breath of wind. "You ask dangerous questions, Emma Collins. Do I have reason to be afraid of the answers?" He turned to face me fully, his expression grave. "Perhaps, but I think not of me." Before I could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted us. A man in a suit, one I recognized from the restaurant, appeared on the path. "Mr. Russo." He spoke in Italian, rapid and urgent. Alessio responded in the same language, his tone sharp with authority. The exchange continued for several moments, tension evident in both men's postures. I stood awkwardly to the side, understanding nothing but sensing that something significant was happening. Finally, Alessio turned back to me. "I apologize, Emma. There's a matter I must attend to. Is everything okay?" "A business concern." His expression had closed off, becoming the mask of the man I'd first met at the restaurant. "Nothing for you to worry about." He escorted me back toward the house, his stride purposeful now, the leisurely exploration of the gardens forgotten. In the foyer, he stopped. "My driver will take you home," he said, his tone professional, distant. "I've enjoyed our evening." The abrupt dismissal stung more than it should have. "That's it? I've enjoyed our evening?" Something flickered in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or frustration. "Emma." "It's fine," I interrupted, pride rising to mask my hurt. "Thank you for dinner. It was lovely." I turned to leave, but his hand caught my wrist, stopping me. His touch was gentle but unyielding. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice low and urgent. "There's a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. Come with me." I stared at him, confused by the sudden shift. "A charity gala? With you?" "As my guest." His thumb traced small circles on the inside of my wrist, sending shivers up my arm. "Say yes." I should have said no. I should have extracted myself from whatever dangerous web I was being drawn into. I should have gone home to my normal life with its normal problems and normal joys. "What should I wear?" I asked instead. Relief softened his features. "I'll take care of it. Be ready at 7. He released my wrist and stepped back, control reasserted. But as the driver escorted me to the waiting car, I glanced back to see Alessio watching from the doorway, his expression unguarded for once. Hungry, possessive, and something else I couldn't name. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of confusion and conflicting emotions. Who was this man who lived in a palace, who commanded such deference, whose business concerns interrupted romantic evenings? And why had he chosen me? As the car pulled up to my building, the driver handed me a small velvet box. "From Mr. Russo," he said. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm, a tiny key fashioned from what appeared to be actual gold. There was no note, no explanation. Just the key, gleaming in the streetlight that filtered through the car window. "What does it open?" I asked the driver. He regarded me with something like pity in his eyes. "That's for Mr. Russo to tell you." I climbed the stairs to my apartment in a daze, the bracelet clutched in my hand. Only when I was inside, door locked and chain in place, did I notice the changes. The dripping faucet no longer dripped. The temperamental radiator hummed with steady heat. The cracked window in the living room had been replaced with new glass. Even the ancient refrigerator had been swapped for a sleek, modern model. On my kitchen counter sat a single red rose in a crystal vase, with a card bearing just 2 words in elegant script. "Until tomorrow." I sank onto my sofa, the bracelet still in my hand, its golden key catching the light. What had I gotten myself into? And more troublingly, why didn't I want to escape? The package arrived at noon the next day. 2 men in black suits delivered it, one carrying the large white box, the other scanning the hallway with watchful eyes. Neither smiled when I opened the door. "From Mr. Russo," said the first man, extending the box toward me. I accepted it wordlessly, feeling the weight of whatever was inside. The men departed without another word, their footsteps echoing down the stairwell. With trembling fingers, I untied the satin ribbon. Nestled in layers of tissue paper lay a gown of such exquisite beauty that I gasped aloud. The fabric was a deep emerald green that shimmered subtly as I lifted it from the box. Silk so fine it felt like water running through my hands. The design was deceptively simple. A fitted bodice with a sweetheart neckline, thin straps, and a skirt that would undoubtedly flow like liquid when worn. Beneath the dress was another smaller box. Inside, I found emerald earrings that caught the light and refracted it into tiny rainbows on my ceiling. Real emeralds, not costume jewelry or synthetic stones, but actual gems that probably cost more than my annual salary. The implications weren't lost on me. Alessio wasn't just inviting me to a charity gala. He was marking me as his. The dress, the jewelry. These were statements of ownership as much as gifts. I should have been offended. Instead, I found myself sliding my fingers along the silken fabric, imagining his reaction when he saw me wearing it. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done before, and spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation. I soaked in a bath scented with the expensive bath oils Jen had given me last Christmas, carefully styled my hair, and applied makeup with more attention than I'd ever given it. When I finally slipped into the gown, I hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. The dress fit as if it had been made specifically for me, which I realized with a start. It probably had been. How had he known my measurements? The thought should have disturbed me, but instead sent a shiver of something like excitement down my spine. At precisely 7 o'clock, my doorbell rang. This time, Alessio himself stood in the hallway, magnificent in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly when he saw me, a reaction so subtle I would have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. "Emma," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "You are breathtaking." Heat rushed to my cheeks. "The dress is beautiful." "It's not the dress." He stepped into my apartment, his presence immediately filling the small space. His eyes took in the changes his people had made. The fixed faucet, the new appliances. I see my staff took care of the issues. You had no right, I said, finding a momentary spark of indignation. You can't just come into my home when I'm not here and change things. Instead of being angered by my reproach, Alessio seemed pleased by it. You're right. I apologize for the intrusion. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. Perhaps this will serve as adequate penance. Inside was a matching necklace to complement the earrings, a teardrop emerald suspended from a delicate gold chain. I can't accept this, I protested weakly. You can. He took the necklace and moved behind me. You will. His fingers brushed against my neck as he fastened the clasp, leaving goosebumps in their wake. The stone settled cold against my skin, warming quickly to my body temperature. There, he said softly, his breath stirring the hair near my ear. Now you're ready. The car waiting downstairs was different from the previous nights. A Rolls-Royce with butter-soft leather seats and a privacy screen separating us from the driver. As we pulled away from my modest apartment building, I felt as though I were leaving more than just my neighborhood behind. You seem nervous, Alessio observed, watching me fidget with the emerald pendant. I've never been to anything like this before, I admitted. I teach kindergarten. Charity galas at the Met aren't exactly in my social calendar. His hand covered mine, stilling my nervous movements. You belong anywhere I take you, Emma. Remember that. The possessiveness in his tone should have alarmed me. Instead, I found myself leaning into it, craving the certainty he offered in a world that had always felt unstable. The museum steps were crowded with New York's elite, women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos milling about under the watchful eyes of security and the flashing cameras of paparazzi. As our car pulled up to the entrance, I felt panic rising in my chest. I can't do this, I whispered. Alessio's eyes met mine. Do you trust me? The question hung between us, weighted with meaning beyond this moment. Did I trust him? This man I barely knew, whose power I could feel but not understand, whose interest in me remained a mystery? I'm trying to, I answered honestly. He nodded once, accepting this. That's enough for now. When the car door opened, Alessio emerged first, then extended his hand to help me out. The moment we appeared, a hush fell over the nearest group of attendees. I felt their stares like physical touch. Curious, assessing, some hostile. Alessio's hand pressed against the small of my back, guiding me up the steps with confident ease. Russo, I heard someone murmur. With a woman. That's new. Who is she? Another voice whispered. Not his usual type. I kept my eyes forward, chin lifted, drawing strength from Alessio's unwavering presence beside me. Inside, the great hall had been transformed into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over the gathering of beautiful people. A string quartet played softly in one corner, nearly drowned out by the buzz of conversation. Mr. Russo. A silver-haired man approached us immediately, hand extended. We weren't sure you'd attend this year, Senator. Alessio greeted him with a nod, briefly clasping the offered hand. May I introduce Emma Collins? The senator's eyes assessed me quickly, a flash of curiosity quickly masked by political charm. A pleasure, Ms. Collins. Any friend of Alessio's is a friend of mine. More introductions followed, a blur of important names and calculating gazes. A judge, a police commissioner, the owners of several prominent businesses. Each greeted Alessio with a mixture of respect and wariness that I found increasingly unsettling. They're afraid of you, I observed quietly when we finally had a moment alone, champagne flutes in hand. Alessio's expression revealed nothing. Respect and fear often look similar from a distance, and up close. His eyes met mine, something dangerous flickering in their depths. Up close, they're both about power. Who has it? Who wants it? Who's willing to do what to keep it? Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew our attention. A group had just arrived, centered around a tall, dark-haired man whose stance radiated the same controlled power as Alessio's. Alessio's body tensed beside me, his expression hardening into something I hadn't seen before. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than to me. What is? That Vittorio Calabresi would dare to show his face here. In my territory. The name meant nothing to me, but the cold fury in Alessio's voice sent a chill down my spine. I watched as the newcomer's eyes scanned the room, eventually landing on us. A smile spread across his face. Not warm, but predatory, and he began making his way in our direction. Alessio, the man called, his accent thicker than Russo's. What a pleasant surprise. Vittorio. Alessio's voice was ice. I wasn't aware you'd received an invitation. Money opens many doors, old friend. Even yours, it seems. His gaze shifted to me, traveling down my body with insulting deliberation. And who is this lovely creature? Before Alessio could answer, I extended my hand. Emma Collins. Vittorio took my fingers, bringing them to his lips. Enchanted Bella. Tell me, how did a rose like you come to be among the thorns? I withdrew my hand, fighting the urge to wipe it against my dress. I'm with Alessio. So I see. His smile widened, eyes darting between us. How unexpected. The tension crackling between the two men was palpable. Around us, conversations had quieted as people sensed the brewing confrontation. If you'll excuse us, Alessio said, his hand finding the small of my back again. Emma and I were just leaving. So soon. Vittorio's mock disappointment couldn't hide his triumph at having disrupted our evening. But the night is young, and I've only just arrived. Perhaps the lovely Emma would prefer to stay. With more entertaining company? I felt Alessio go rigid beside me. When he spoke, his voice was so low only I and Vittorio could hear it. Speak to her again. Look at her again, and it will be the last mistake you ever make. The threat hung in the air between them, deadly serious. For a moment, I glimpsed something beneath Alessio's controlled exterior, something violent and ruthless that confirmed every suspicion I'd had about what kind of man he truly was. Vittorio merely laughed, though the sound didn't reach his eyes. Always so dramatic, Russo. Some things never change. He inclined his head toward me. Until we meet again. Bella Emma. As he sauntered away, I turned to Alessio, questions burning on my tongue, but the expression on his face stopped me cold. We're leaving, he said, already guiding me toward the exit with gentle but insistent pressure. Now. In the car, the silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Alessio stared out the window, his profile harsh in the passing streetlights. His hand rested on the seat between us, fingers curled into a fist so tight his knuckles showed white. Are you going to tell me what that was about? I finally asked. No. The bluntness of his answer stung. I think I deserve to know why I was just used as a pawn in whatever game you and that man are playing. Alessio's head turned sharply. Is that what you think? That you're a pawn? What else would I be? I don't even know who you really are. My voice rose with frustration and fear. Everyone there knew. I could see it in their eyes. The senator, the judge. They know exactly what kind of man Alessio Russo is, but I'm the only one in the dark. His expression softened marginally. Perhaps it's better that way. Better for whom? Not for me. I clutched the emerald pendant at my throat. You dress me up like a doll, parade me around your world, but you don't think I deserve the truth? The car had stopped moving, but I was too focused on Alessio to notice where we were. His eyes searched my face, looking for something I couldn't name. The truth, he repeated, the words heavy with meaning. Are you certain that's what you want, Emma? Yes. He was silent for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. Then he reached forward and lowered the privacy screen. Take us to Pier 86, he instructed the driver. The car pulled back into traffic. I stared at Alessio, confusion replacing some of my anger. Where are we going? Somewhere we can talk privately. 20 minutes later, we stood at the end of an abandoned pier. The water of the Hudson lapped against the pilings below us, black and glittering with reflected city lights. The night air was cool against my bare shoulders, but I barely noticed the chill. Alessio had removed his jacket and draped it over me without asking, another small act of possession that I didn't have the will to resist. Vittorio Calabresi and I grew up together in Sicily, Alessio began, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of New Jersey. Our families were connected. When I came to America 15 years ago, it was with his family's blessing and certain conditions. Connected how? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. His eyes met mine, unflinching. Our families controlled certain aspects of business in our region. Imports, exports, protection services. You're talking about the mafia. The words fell from my lips like stones. That's an oversimplified term, but yes, the Cosa Nostra. He watched my face carefully. Does that frighten you? I should have lied. I should have nodded, made my excuses, and run as far and as fast as I could. Instead, I found myself answering truthfully. Less than it should. Something like relief flickered across his features. The agreement was that I would establish myself here, in New York, and operate independently, but with ties to the old country. For years, it worked. I built my businesses, legitimate businesses, Emma, restaurants, real estate, import companies. Yes, there are other ventures that operate in gray areas, but nothing like what my father was involved in. And Vittorio? Alessio's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, he arrived in New York, uninvited, unwelcome. He's been attempting to undermine certain aspects of my business. Tonight was a power play, showing himself in public at an event he knows I always attend. Using me to get to you, I surmised. Yes. The honesty was refreshing, even as the implications terrified me. Why me, Alessio? Why did you let me stay at your table that night? Why all of this? I gestured to the dress, the jewelry, the night. He turned to face me fully, his expression more open than I'd ever seen it. Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were different, pure in a way I've never known, untouched by the darkness I've lived in. I'm not some innocent child, I protested. No, you're a woman. Strong, intelligent, compassionate. His hand came up to cut my cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man with so much violence in his past. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? How precious? The raw emotion in his voice made my heart stutter. I'm a kindergarten teacher from Queens. There's nothing special about me. Everything about you is special, Emma Collins. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending sparks of electricity down my spine. And now that I've found you, I don't intend to let you go. The possessiveness in his declaration should have repelled me. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, craving the certainty he offered in a world that had always felt unstable. I can't be part of your world, I whispered. The violence, the danger. You won't be. His voice was firm, resolute. I'll keep that separate. Always. You'll never see that side of me, never be touched by it. You can't promise that. Not after tonight. His expression darkened. Vittorio was a mistake. One that will be corrected. The calm way he said it sent a chill through me. What does that mean? It means you don't need to worry about him anymore. I stepped back, breaking contact with his hand. Are you going to kill him? Alessio's silence was answer enough. I can't be with someone who solves problems that way, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I won't. For a long moment, he said nothing, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the pier. Then, slowly, he nodded. For you, he said finally. I'll find another solution. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by the unsettling realization of what had just happened. I had somehow acquired the power to influence a man who terrified senators and judges. Come, he said, extending his hand toward me. It's getting cold. Let me take you home. I hesitated, standing at the precipice of a decision that would change my life irrevocably. If I took his hand now, knowing what I knew, there would be no going back. I would be choosing this man, this dangerous, complicated, possessive man, and all that came with him. Emma, he said softly, trust me. As I placed my hand in his, I felt the weight of the golden key charm against my wrist, the key he had given me after our second night together. I still didn't know what it opened. Perhaps it was symbolic, access to his world, his heart, his truth. Or perhaps it was literal, a key to a gilded cage he was building around me. Either way, as his fingers closed around mine, I knew I had just turned that key in its lock. For better or worse, I had chosen Alessio Russo. And there would be consequences neither of us could foresee. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of contradictions. By day, I was still Miss Collins, guiding tiny hands through finger painting and phonics. By night, I entered Alessio's world of luxury and unspoken power. He never took me to another public event after the Disastrous charity gala. Instead, our evenings were spent in the privacy of his mansion or at his restaurants after closing hours. I kept waiting for regret to settle in, for the rational part of my brain to finally overcome whatever spell Alessio had cast over me. Instead, I found myself falling deeper under his influence, craving his presence when we were apart. "You're different," Jen observed over coffee one Saturday morning. We'd barely seen each other since the night she'd lent me the blue dress. "Distracted. And you're always checking your phone." I glanced guiltily at my cell, which I'd placed face up on the cafe table. "Sorry. Work stuff." "Bullshit." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "It's him, isn't it? The mystery man." I couldn't suppress my smile, which was answer enough. "Oh my God." Her eyes widened. "You're in love with him." Was I? The thought had been circling my mind for days, but I hadn't allowed myself to examine it too closely. Love seemed too simple a word for what I felt for Alessio, a complex tangle of desire, fear, fascination, and something deeper that I couldn't name. "It's complicated," I said finally. "Is he married?" Jen asked, immediately jumping to the worst conclusion. "No, nothing like that." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "He's just not what I expected." "In a good way?" I thought of Alessio's tenderness when we were alone. The way he listened when I spoke about my students or my dreams, how he'd kept his promise not to involve me in the darker aspects of his life. "Yes," I said, "in a good way." But even as I spoke, my phone lit up with a notification. A text from Marco, Alessio's most trusted bodyguard, who had somehow become my shadow whenever Alessio couldn't be with me himself. "In position outside. Take your time." I'd grown accustomed to the constant surveillance, telling myself it was Alessio's way of protecting me. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this, the reality of my new normal struck me with disturbing clarity. Later that evening, Alessio and I sat in his private library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books and warmed by a crackling fireplace. I was curled against him on a velvet sofa, his arm draped casually around my shoulders as he read through business documents. "Move in with me," he said suddenly, the words falling into the comfortable silence between us. I sat up, startled. "What?" "Move in with me," he repeated, setting aside his papers. "This house is too large for one person, and you're here most nights anyway." It was true. My tiny apartment had begun to feel like a temporary stop between visits to Alessio's world. "I can't just abandon my life," I protested weakly. "What life?" His question wasn't cruel, merely matter of fact. "Your apartment is falling apart. Your roommate is never there. You spend all your free time here. I have my job, my students." "You would still have your job." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. "Nothing would change except your address." Everything would change, and we both knew it. Moving in with Alessio would be a public declaration of our relationship, an acknowledgement that I had accepted not just him, but everything he represented. "I need time to think about it," I said. He nodded, disappointment flickering briefly across his features, before his usual mask of control returned. "Of course." The next day, Sunday, Alessio was called away on business. I used the rare moment of freedom to visit my parents' graves, something I did every few months, though less frequently since meeting Alessio. The cemetery was peaceful, autumn leaves crunching beneath my feet as I made my way to their shared headstone. "I wish you could meet him," I said softly, placing fresh flowers in the small metal vase embedded in the ground. "I think you'd have questions, concerns." "I have them too." The stone offered no answers, just the engraved names of the two people who had loved me unconditionally. They had died in a car accident when I was 19, long enough ago that the sharp edges of grief had softened, but recently enough that I still found myself reaching for the phone to call my mother when something significant happened in my life. "He's not who you would have chosen for me," I continued, "but he makes me feel safe, protected, like nothing bad could ever happen to me again." As I spoke the words, I realized their truth. Since Alessio had entered my life, the constant anxiety that had been my companion since my parents' death had receded. The fear of loss that had colored all my relationships had been replaced by a strange certainty. He won't leave me, I whispered. He won't die. He's too powerful for that. The delusion of this thought struck me even as I voiced it. No one was immune to death or disaster, perhaps especially not a man in Alessio's position. Lost in these thoughts, I didn't notice the black SUV parked near the cemetery gates until I was almost upon it. The window rolled down, revealing a face I recognized with a jolt of fear. Vittorio Calabresi. "Bella Emma," he called, his accent thick with false warmth. What a fortunate coincidence. I froze, every instinct screaming danger. There was no coincidence here. He had followed me, waited for a moment when I was alone. "Mr. Calabresi," I managed to keep my voice steady. "I was just leaving. Please, allow me to give you a ride." The rear door swung open. "I insist." The threat was implicit. I glanced around, hoping to see Marco or one of Alessio's other men, but the cemetery was deserted on this chilly Sunday afternoon. "That won't be necessary," I said, already reaching for my phone. "I have my own transportation." Before my fingers could touch my purse, a man stepped out from behind a nearby mausoleum, one of Vittorio's guards, his intention clear in his stance. "I think you misunderstand, Bella," Vittorio said, smile still in place. "This is not an invitation you can decline." My heart hammering, I calculated my options. Running would be futile. Screaming might bring help, but more likely would just accelerate whatever Vittorio had planned. "What do you want?" I asked, stalling. "Just a conversation." "About our mutual friend," he gestured to the open door. "Please, I would hate for this to become unpleasant." With no viable alternative, I slid into the back seat beside him, my body rigid with fear. The door closed with a soft click that sounded to my ears like a prison cell locking. "Relax," Vittorio said as the car pulled away from the curb. "If I wanted to hurt you, we wouldn't be having this civil conversation." "Then what do you want?" "Information." His dark eyes studied me with calculating interest. "How much has Alessio told you about his operation? About our history?" "Nothing," I lied. "We don't discuss his business." Vittorio laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. "Ah, he plays the gentleman with you. How charming. And convenient. If you're trying to turn me against him, not at all. I simply want you to understand your situation clearly." He leaned back, watching me with something like pity. "Do you know why he chose you, Emma Collins? A kindergarten teacher with no connections, no wealth, no power?" The question echoed my own doubts, ones I'd been trying to silence since the night Alessio had first invited me to sit at his table. "He cares for me," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Perhaps, in his way." Vittorio's smile turned knowing. "But more importantly, you are malleable, impressionable. With no family to ask difficult questions, no connections to his world who might warn you." His words struck too close to home. I turned away, watching the unfamiliar streets pass outside the window. "Where are you taking me? Just for a drive? To finish our conversation without interruption?" He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a phone. My phone. He must have had it lifted from my purse without my noticing. "Ah, look. Your protector is calling." Alessio's name flashed on the screen. Vittorio let it ring, his smile widening as he watched my reaction. "He keeps you on a very short leash, doesn't he? Calls to check in, has his men follow you everywhere?" He tossed the phone onto the seat between us. "Tell me, do you ever wonder if it's not protection he's providing, but surveillance?" "You don't know anything about our relationship," I snapped, reaching for my phone. Vittorio caught my wrist. "I know more than you think. I know that 3 months ago, Alessio received word that his enemies were looking for leverage against him. I know that the very next day, he happened to meet a beautiful, vulnerable young woman with no family ties. The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying he planned our meeting? That's ridiculous. I sat at his table by accident." "Did you?" His grip on my wrist tightened. "Are you certain the hostess wasn't instructed to seat you there? That your friend's blind date suggestion wasn't arranged?" Doubt crept in like poison. Could it be true? Had our entire relationship been orchestrated from the beginning? He would do whatever necessary to protect his interests, Vittorio interrupted, including creating the perfect girlfriend, one who appears to have no connection to his business, who could be used as a shield against his enemies or as bait for a trap. My phone rang again. Alessio's persistence suggested he already knew something was wrong. "What do you want from me?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. "Currently, nothing." Vittorio released my wrist. "Consider this a courtesy call. A warning from someone who knows Alessio Russo better than anyone. He is not who he pretends to be with you." The car had circled back, returning to the cemetery where my parents lay. As it rolled to a stop, Vittorio leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "Ask him about Sofia," he whispered. "Watch his face when you say her name." Before I could respond, the door opened. I scrambled out, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The SUV pulled away immediately, leaving me alone with Vittorio's poisonous words echoing in my mind. By the time I reached my apartment, missed calls and messages had filled my phone. I responded to Alessio with a brief text. "I'm fine, needed some time alone," but couldn't bring myself to answer when he called again. Who was Sofia? Why would her name affect Alessio? And most disturbingly, had our meeting truly been orchestrated? I spent a sleepless night turning these questions over in my mind. By morning, I had reached a decision. I would confront Alessio directly, ask about Sofia, watch his reaction just as Vittorio had suggested. His response would tell me everything I needed to know. When I arrived at school the next day, the principal called me into her office immediately. "Emma," she said, her expression grave, "there's been an incident. I'm afraid I need to place you on administrative leave." "What?" I stared at her in confusion. What incident? She slid a folder across her desk. Inside were printouts of emails from my school account to a parent, containing inappropriate comments about their child. "These aren't mine," I protested, scanning the messages with growing horror. "I never wrote these. The technology department confirmed they came from your account," she said, sympathy mixing with professional distance. "We have to investigate. It's standard procedure." I left the school in a daze, clutching the folder of fabricated evidence. This was no coincidence. It had to be connected to Vittorio, to yesterday's warning. He was showing me how easily my life could be destroyed. Or was it Alessio? A test of my loyalty, perhaps. A way to make me more dependent on him, just as he'd asked me to move in. By the time I reached Alessio's mansion that evening, my confusion had hardened into determination. I needed answers, regardless of how painful they might be. Alessio met me at the door himself, concern etched into his features. "Emma, where have you been?" "I've been worried sick." "Who is Sofia?" I asked without preamble. His reaction was everything Vittorio had promised. The color drained from his face, his body going completely still as if I'd struck him physically. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, his voice barely audible. And in that moment I knew, whatever lay at the heart of Alessio Russo, whatever darkness, whatever secret, it was bound up in that name, Sofia. Alessio's hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal tumbler. We stood in his study, the heavy oak door closed behind us. I'd never seen him this unsettled, this vulnerable. "Tell me who Sofia is," I repeated, standing my ground despite the fear coiling in my stomach. He took a long swallow of whiskey before meeting my gaze. "Where did you hear that name? Does it matter?" "Yes." His voice hardened. "It matters very much." I hesitated, weighing the risks of honesty against deception. Vittorio Calabresi, the crystal tumbler shattered in Alessio's grip, glass and whiskey spraying across the expensive carpet. Blood welled from his palm, but he seemed not to notice. "When?" he demanded. "When did you speak to him?" "Yesterday, at the cemetery." I lifted my chin. He found me visiting my parents' graves. Alessio moved suddenly, reaching for his phone on the desk. "Marco!" he barked when the call connected. "Find Vittorio, now." "Alessio." I stepped forward, grabbing his wrist. "Stop. Just tell me who she is." He stared at me, conflict raging behind his eyes. For the first time, I saw the full extent of his struggle. The man who wanted to shield me from his world battling with the man who lived in darkness. Was she your wife? I asked quietly. A lover? Alessio sank into his leather chair, the fight suddenly draining from him. My daughter. Of all the possibilities I had imagined, this one had never occurred to me. I stood frozen, watching as he removed a handkerchief from his pocket and wrapped it around his bleeding hand with mechanical precision. You have a child, I finally managed. Had. The word fell like a stone between us. She died. 5 years ago. I moved to the chair opposite his desk, my legs suddenly unsteady. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No one knows. His eyes lifted to mine, raw with an old grief. That was the point. What happened to her? Alessio was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. When he spoke, his voice was flat, as if reciting facts about someone else's life. Sophia was 3 when she was taken. A retaliation kidnapping. My enemies using her to control me. His hand clenched around the bloodied handkerchief. I did everything they asked, gave them territory, money, influence, but it wasn't enough. Horror crept through me as I began to understand where this story was heading. Alessio. I found her 2 weeks later, he continued, as if he hadn't heard me. In an abandoned warehouse, she was already gone. Tears spilled down my cheeks, but Alessio's eyes remained dry. His grief calcified into something harder than sorrow. After that, I erased her. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. Every photograph, every record, every trace that she had existed. I sold the house we'd lived in, fired the staff who had known her. I made it as if she had never been born. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Because the men who took her are still out there. His eyes met mine, blazing with a cold fury that made me shrink back. And when I find them, when I finally make them pay, I don't want them to know it's coming. I don't want them to have any connection between Sophia and me that might warn them. The magnitude of his pain, and his rage, stole my breath. This wasn't just grief. It was vengeance stretched across years, a purpose that had consumed him. Sophia's mother? I asked softly. Died in childbirth. He closed his eyes briefly. I raised Sophia alone. She was everything. I thought of the empty mansion with its perfect gardens, the solitary man who commanded fear and respect throughout the city. How hollow his power must have seemed in the face of such loss. What did Vittorio tell you? Alessio asked, his composure returning by degrees. I hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. He implied that our meeting wasn't an accident, that you arranged it because you needed someone with no family connections, someone who could be leverage or a shield. A bitter laugh escaped him, and you believed him. It wasn't a question, and I couldn't deny the doubt that had taken root. I don't know what to believe anymore. Did you arrange for me to sit at your table that night? No. His answer was immediate and firm. That was chance, Emma. Nothing more. Then why me? Why did you let me stay? Alessio rose from his chair and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. Because when you smiled at the waiter, a genuine smile, not the practiced ones I see every day, something inside me recognized you. He turned to face me. You reminded me that goodness still exists in the world, that not everything beautiful gets destroyed. The raw honesty in his voice made my chest ache. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but Vittorio's words still echoed in my mind. There's more, I said, forcing myself to continue. I was placed on administrative leave today. Someone sent inappropriate emails from my school account, emails I never wrote. Alessio's expression darkened. Vittorio. Or you, I challenged. To make me more dependent on you, just as you asked me to move in. He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling before my chair and taking my hands in his. Emma, look at me. His eyes locked with mine, intense and unwavering. I would never hurt you. Not your career, not your reputation, not your freedom. Never. I searched his face for any hint of deception and found none. Then why is this happening? Because Vittorio knows I care for you. His grip tightened on my hands. He's using you to get to me, just as my enemies use Sophia. Fear clutched at my heart. Am I in danger? Not while I'm alive. The certainty in his voice was absolute. But this is why I wanted you to move in. Not to control you. To protect you. The pieces were falling into place. His possessiveness, the constant security, his reluctance to let me out of his sight. It wasn't obsession driving him, but terror. The fear of losing someone else he cared for. What happens now? I asked. Now I end this, once and for all. He stood, resolution hardening his features. Vittorio has crossed a line he cannot uncross. Alarm shot through me. Alessio, no, I promised you I wouldn't kill him, he interrupted. And I'll keep that promise. But he will leave New York, tonight. He will never contact you again. And he will pay for threatening what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have disturbed me. Instead, it offered a strange comfort, the certainty that I was valued, protected, cherished. Come with me, Alessio said suddenly. Where? There's something I need to show you. He led me through the mansion, up the grand staircase, and down a hallway I'd never explored before. At the end stood a door, simple, unadorned, unlike the ornate entrances to other rooms. Alessio withdrew a key from his pocket, identical to the charm on the bracelet he'd given me. This room has been locked for 5 years, he said quietly. No one has entered it since the day I returned to this house without her. The door swung open to reveal a child's bedroom, preserved like a time capsule. Soft pink walls, a canopy bed with fairy lights woven through the fabric, shelves lined with stuffed animals and books. In the corner stood an easel with a half-finished painting, bright colors splashed across the paper in the unmistakable style of a toddler. Sophia, I whispered, tears filling my eyes again. Alessio remained in the doorway, unable or unwilling to step inside. The key I gave you. It opens this room. I wanted you to know, to understand, why you are the way you are, I finished for him. He nodded, his expression more vulnerable than I had ever seen it. I couldn't save her, but I can save you. In that moment, I understood the true nature of Alessio's feelings for me. Not possession, not control, but protection. The desperate need to prevent history from repeating itself. His love was damaged, twisted by trauma and loss. But it was real. I'm sorry about your school, he said after a long silence. I'll fix it. The emails will be traced to Vittorio's people. Your reputation will be restored, and Vittorio will never bother you again. His tone made it clear the matter was settled. I should have pressed further, demanded details, set boundaries. Instead, I found myself stepping into his embrace, my head resting against his chest, where I could hear the steady beat of his heart. Stay here tonight, Alessio murmured into my hair. Please. I nodded against his chest. I'll stay. That night, as Alessio held me in his bed, I made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. I couldn't undo his past, or heal his wounds completely. I couldn't bring back Sophia, or erase the violence in his world. But I could offer him something he hadn't had in 5 years. Hope. A future. A reason to build rather than destroy. I'll move in, I whispered into the darkness, but on my terms. I felt him go still beside me. What terms? I keep my job. I keep my friends. I'm not a prisoner in a golden cage, Alessio, of course. And no more secrets. I propped myself up on one elbow, looking down at his face in the moonlight filtering through the windows. I want to know everything, the good and the bad. I can't live in the dark. He hesitated at this, conflict evident in his expression. There are things about my business, my past, that would put you in danger if you knew them. I'm already in danger, I countered. Keeping me ignorant doesn't protect me. It makes me vulnerable. Like today. Alessio considered this, his thumb tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. You're right, he admitted finally. No more secrets. I laid my head back on his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heartbeat. And one more condition. Name it. We find a way to honor Sophia's memory. Not with vengeance, but with something good. Something she would have been proud of. His arms tightened around me, and I felt a shudder pass through his body. Silent tears at last breaking through the walls he'd built around his grief. A foundation, he said hoarsely, for children who have suffered trauma. In her name, I echoed, sealing our pact with a kiss. 3 months later, the Sophia Russo Foundation opened its doors, a bright, cheerful center where children who had experienced violence or loss could receive therapy, education, and support. Alessio stood beside me at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, his face composed, but his eyes shining with an emotion I'd rarely seen there. Pride. Vittorio Calabresi had indeed left New York, reportedly returning to Sicily under mysterious circumstances. The emails at my school had been traced to one of his associates, my reputation restored, my position secured. Alessio never told me exactly what had transpired between them, and I never asked. Some secrets were better left buried. As for us, we found our balance. I continued teaching, my students blissfully unaware that their Miss Collins went home each night to one of the most powerful men in the city. Alessio continued his business, much of which remained in shadows. But he shared what he could, trusting me with truths he had never spoken aloud before. The key charm on my bracelet remained a symbol of what we had built together. A door unlocked, a past honored but not forgotten, a future created from the ashes of tragedy. We would never have a normal relationship, not with his position, his enemies, the constant need for vigilance. But we had found something precious in each other: understanding, acceptance, a love forged in darkness, but reaching always toward the light. That night, as we stood on the balcony of what was now our home, Alessio wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder as we gazed at the city lights below. "I never believed in fate," he murmured against my ear, "until you sat at the wrong table." I smiled, leaning back into his embrace, the right table, as it turns out. He turned me to face him, his eyes, those cold blue eyes that had once frightened me, now warm with an emotion I never tired of seeing. "Ti amo, Emma Collins," he said softly. "With everything I am, and I love you," I replied, shadows and all. As his lips met mine, I knew this was no fairy tale ending. There would be challenges ahead, dangers I couldn't foresee, compromises I would have to make. But I had chosen this life with open eyes, had chosen this complicated, damaged, fiercely loving man. And in that choice, I had found my own power, my own voice, my own unexpected destiny. Sometimes the wrong table is exactly where you're meant to be.